Hey all, it's Preacher, and today we're looking at the Protection Paladin. The Stalwart tank is barely a guild on the planet now that doesn't have a Protection Paladin, and then something else to pair it up with. Why? It's really good at everything. Really good at everything. So it's also great for beginners. It's great for advanced players. There's some extra tricks we can do to make it a little bit more interesting at the top end. But if this is something you're looking to get into tanking, you're thinking, hey, maybe I can do some tanking and see what that's all about. Protection Paladin is always going to be my recommendation as something you start with, because it's very hard to screw up on a basic level, but there's always great ways of pushing yourself in the future. So what are the basics with the Prot Paladin, right? What is the core fundamental idea? Just like any tank, our core fundamental idea doesn't alter between the classes. It doesn't matter what tank you play, the core idea remains the same. It's not like with DPS where we say a combat rogue needs to focus on finishes and things of that nature. With the Prot Paladin, it's all about the tanking values. Number one, don't die. It sounds easier than you think. Not dying is actually a very crucial part of being a tank, as you can imagine, but you have all sorts of tools to enable you to do that better. And obviously you're trying to push yourself as being the tank people want. If people have two tanks in a guild, you want to be that tank that people are like, oh, I wish he was here, right? Because that guy just takes less damage. You'll often find healers compare tanks, like, I don't know what it is, these guys have the same gear, they play the same class, but for some reason, this guy just takes way less damage. And that's because you're using your core tools and your active mitigation properly. Active mitigation for the Prot Paladin comes in the form of Shield of the Righteous, which uses 3 holy power. And of course, in terms of things like Divine Protection, we have Guarding the Ancient Kings, aka Shield Wall. Most people refer to it as Shield Wall. And of course, Ardent Defender, which people tend to use incorrectly, but we'll talk about that later. So, number one, don't die. Number two, and now this is probably something that would be considered like a sort of idea in the past, but it's now become so fundamental in proving yourself as a core tank, I've moved it up to number 2 in a priority, which is making sure everybody else in your raid is happy. Now, what does that mean? As the tank, you have to understand you are the control. You are the guy who is in charge every single time. It doesn't matter what people believe in their selfish ego. As the tank, you are in fact controlling many, many aspects of the fight. And by being a good tank, you can actually make people do more damage. You can make the whole raid take less damage. And you can generally just make things happen a lot quicker. And that's all down to generally position. Where are you tanking the boss? How are you facing the boss? All these kind of things are ideas that need to be going on in your head. And believe me, Warlords of Draenor is hugely designed around the idea that tanks have this kind of control and can plan and adapt properly, and a good tank will be noticeably a huge improvement to your raid. So number 2 is taking care of things, like especially your melee DPS, yeah? Lots of stuff going on in Highmaul and in the forthcoming Blackrock Foundry, where the melee will be constantly having to dodge and move around from things. Tank position, tanks taking care of the melee, tanks being aware of the melee will be a huge factor in determining whether you are the best tank or whether you are a scrub-a-dub tank who belongs, you know, in the down dregs of society. And I don't want you to be that way. So those are the core ideas you're going to be doing. Let's look at it. As a Prot Paladin, your specific burden, if you should have one, is going to be glyphing. You're going to be reglyphing all the damn time. We'll talk about that in a sec, but let me give you a quick talents overview of what you should be taking and the ideas behind that. At level 15, you're probably going to be taking Speed of Light. The other two are actually quite good. In general, I prefer things like Long Arm of the Law, especially for 5-mans. If I'm going to be doing challenge modes and whatnots, I like Long Arm of the Law. I have Judgment all the time. It allows me to move very quickly between lots of packs in a short time period. Really like that. I'm going to be spending my holy power, so I can't rely on Pursuit of Justice as much. When it comes to raiding, different kettle of fish. Speed of Light tends to be better. Why? Butcher knocks you away, always a pain in the ass. You've got Twin Ogron, you have to drag the ad out for Whirlwind, you've got to move out of Pulverize. Always good to have Speed of Light there so you can move super quick. Bracken Spore, moving between mushrooms. All these factors, Mark of Chaos and Imperator. I could go on. Plenty of ideas about moving away very quickly, on demand, super burst, Speed of Light, okay? Tends to be the go-to. Level 30, doesn't fucking matter, pick whatever you want. Fist of Justice, generally for 5-mans, which is what I do on this guy. Obviously, I can't raid on every single alt. That would be nice, but we can't do it. At level 45, mathematically, in the sphere of the maths, Eternal Flame can be really good. In reality, you guys come to me hopefully to give you the voice of experience and reality of how things go outside of a spreadsheet. Sacred Shield is the go-to. Why? The fundamental idea with Eternal Flame is really good. It gives you a hot, gives you a huge heal, works with Bastion of Glory, which is something you should very much be aware of, is every time you use a finisher, you will be generating Bastion of Glory procs, which give you extra healing. But the majority of the time, that big heal goes to the waste, and some of it is just overhealing and therefore useless. Sacred Shield is just fundamentally better in terms of design. So there you go, Sacred Shield, good shit. At level 60 is personal self. If you need to keep yourself alive, Unbreakable Spirit is the way to go. You get lower cooldown on Divine Protection, which is awesome. Divine Shield is very, very handy, especially in High Maul, removing debuffs and whatnot. And of course, Lay on Hands is always really cool, right? You always want that cooldown. So Unbreakable Spirit is generally the go-to. If you're going to be doing challenge modes and stuff like that, Clemency is better, especially if you can do double hops. Double hops is fantastic. There are very few situations, but those situations do occur where you can do things like double hops, and therefore it's just amazing when it pulls it off. Kind of think of stupid little scenarios like Skyreach with those birds that focus down random targets. You could put a couple of hops on the healer and some caster DPS. You reduce the chances of causing like significant downtime, healer mana exhaustion, all those kind of things very, very quickly. So I like Clemency for that. When I go into a raid though, Unbreakable Spirit is the way to go. Level 75. This is debatable, in which is a good thing. It means you get to pick and choose whatever the hell you like. Holy Avenger has the advantage of huge burst, right? Huge burst DPS, if that's going to be a factor in the raid that you're doing. I personally prefer Divine Purpose, and that is because I like Seraphim. I say like. Like's the wrong word. I use Seraphim. I don't like Seraphim, but I'll get to that shortly. But there's a synergy between Divine Purpose and Seraphim, which I think works really well for consistency. We'll talk about soon. Sanctified Wrath has its place, but, you know, it's not really as cool as either having on-demand burst or consistency. As a tank, we generally go for one of those two things. Do we need burst damage, really? Then Holy Avenger is the way to go. Do we need consistency throughout the duration of the fight? Divine Purpose is the way to go. But you have your choice, okay? So you have your choice. At level 90, you're going to choose Light's Hammer if there's any form of AoE whatsoever, cleave, whatever it might be. Light's Hammer is just fantastic for that. Execution Sentence if it's something like the Butcher, which was straight up tanking one target. Nothing else is possibly going to happen. Execution Sentence is the way to go. It's as simple as that. It's not really a mathematical debate. It's cleave or single target. End of story. At level 100, right, let's get into it a little bit. I'm probably going to talk about this a little while on the Paladin stuff. Holy Shield, if you're just getting started out in tanking, okay, you're going to have a nice idea of tanking, plus you're doing your 5-mans and you're learning in there and that kind of stuff, which I always recommend, by the way. 5-mans have way better scenarios than raiding in general for tanks currently in the game. If I find an alternative to that, I will let you know. But Holy Shield is a passive, allows you to block spells. It'll just do its job regardless, okay? It doesn't matter. It's not an extra keybind. It's not an extra thing to worry about. And Paladins have a lot of stuff going on, especially if you're being a good Paladin and using things like your hands and using all sorts of your other cooldowns as well. So Holy Shield will just do its job. It's a passive. It's there. It's doing it, and you never need to worry about it. Seraphim is generally the go-to. So if you're the type of guy to go out on Armory, a big tank, and be like, oh, he uses Seraphim, so I must use Seraphim, maybe not. Depends how good you are. Seraphim is a little bit tricky. You have to manage it. It's a 30-second cooldown with a 15-second uptime. That means that 50% of your fight, you should be under the effects of Seraphim. Seraphim makes you pretty fucking hardcore while Seraphim is up in terms of damage and damage reduction. It's badass, okay? Seraphim is very cool. Seraphim also costs 5 holy power, right? Which means every 30 seconds you're going to need to have banked 5 holy power. You need to have pooled it up, ready to go when Seraphim comes off cooldown. You're going to need something to track it, like I've got to tell me when here, that tells me my Seraphim is 1, not off cooldown, and more importantly, if I check the condition here, in 10 seconds it will be off cooldown, giving me ample warning of when and where to get my Seraphim ready. Now, 5 holy power is a bit of a pain in the ass. Why? Our active mitigation comes from Shield of the Righteous, which means while we're generating 5 holy power, we're not using Shield of the Righteous, which makes us a little bit extra vulnerable, okay? You can sort of prop that up with a Divine Protection, but that means your Divine Protection is going towards boosting another talent. Maybe you want your Divine Protection elsewhere. There's lots of decisions like that to take in mind. This is why I like Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose generally procs a hell of a lot, yeah? If you've ever used it, it procs a hell of a lot, which means we can still be using Shield of the Righteous while pooling, because it gives us a free Shield of the Righteous, which means we can still, in general, most occasions, not all, be using our Shield of the Righteous in order to maintain some active mitigation while still pooling for Seraphim on a pretty regular basis. The idea with Seraphim is you need 5 holy power pretty much every 30 to 40 seconds, so otherwise it's a waste, right? And you might as well have gone with something else. In which case, if you're not prepared to manage that and you're just getting used to tanking, go with Holy Shield, okay? Go with Holy Shield, let yourself learn your rotation and abilities and all that kind of stuff, then come back to Seraphim when you're a bit ready. What I will say is if you're using Seraphim, you can see this is on a macro, make sure you've got things like on uses, especially Especially things that aren't of major importance. If you have a trinket that's a huge defensive cooldown, don't obviously macro that in. But if you have some minor trinkets or whatever and racials, sure, go ahead and throw that on top of Seraphim, and you'll be able to take full advantage of that while you're also using what is effectively a major DPS cooldown. Okay, so that's a good idea. Empowered seals. I'm never going to talk too much about this because frankly I think it's disgusting. Mathematically it can in fact pull ahead ever so fucking slightly, but it's such a giant pain in the ass that I just don't recommend it. I always feel, regardless of how good you are, you're going to have to put so much focus into making empowered seals work that you're going to fuck up something fundamental in your gameplay on some occasion, which just doesn't need to happen. It's totally unnecessary, and therefore I think it's a horrible talent. I hope that it doesn't pull way ahead in terms of mass to the point where it's like you really have to use this. In order to use empowered seals properly, you're going to have to ensure that like all 3 of your seals are keybinded, which is probably something you don't want to do, and also tracking it on some separate sort of idea. In other words, it takes a lot of work to get very, 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 very little reward. Choose Seraphim or Holy Shield depending on your skill level. As simple as that. Right, I said a lot about reglyphing. So this is why. Prot Paladins actually have a huge choice of glyphs which are very, very cool. The most important one which you'll be swapping regularly is Glyph of Divine Protection. Divine Protection reduces the magical damage. As you know, Divine Protection at its base form is magical damage reduction. Not everything has magical damage. It's simple as that. In fact, some spells, if you think about Tectus and the red floor that he generates, the red tracking beam, that's actually physical damage, not magic. In which case, we like having the Glyph of Divine Protection. Some bosses just don't have magical damage, and that's as simple as that. And therefore, Glyph of Divine Protection becomes useless at that point. Not the glyph, the spell. So then we glyph it, we get 20% physical damage reduction. That's a win. That's a win in my book. That helps prop us up for building up Seraphim, all that kind of stuff. But be aware, does this fight have heavy magical damage? Then we're going to want to swap that out. Glyph of the Consecrate is like my wonderful ability for going through 5-mans because it's so great. We're always on the move in 5-mans, but obviously in a raid, probably not. So you're going to be able to swap that out. Again, choices to be made. Alabaster Shield is generally the one that sticks around regardless of whatever's going on. Simple as that. Sticks around all the damn time because it's just so fucking good, okay? Your successful blocks increase the damage of your next Shield of the Righteous. You're going to be casting that all the time. You're going to be blocking all the time. And it's just generally very cool. And it's not something that we can't swap out. These two are, like, swappable on a basis, and this one can stick around. What are you going to be swapping it for? Good question. Things like Focus Shield. Okay, Avenger's Shield is badass, hits 5 targets. But again, sometimes we're tanking one boss, in which case all those extra hits of Avenger's Shield just go to waste and we don't really need them. Therefore, you can go ahead and boost 30% damage on an Avenger's Shield, which makes it do shitloads of single target damage. My god, it's so fucking good. So fucking good. You got things like Glyph of Holy Wrath, which stuns elementals and all that kind of stuff. There are plenty of choices in here for things that you can swap around to, depending on what it is that you're doing. So bear that in mind. Your only real one that'll stick around all the time is Alabaster Shield. The other two you can swap around at will, and you will be doing, a good tank will be swapping these all the damn time. You might be doing something like Butcher, Glyph of Focus Shield, but now I'm coming back to doing sort of lots of trash. I want to get rid of that, so my Avenger Shield hits 5 targets, and now I want Glyph of the Consecrate because I'm going to be knocked everywhere and all that kind of stuff. You're going to be swapping all this stuff around all the time. What's your rotation? Super basic, right? We can get into all sorts of little maths and stuff, but it's absolutely unnecessary. Really, your priority is anything that generates holy power. More holy power leads to more Shield of the Righteous. It means to get into Seraphim more quickly, so which means your Judgment, your Crusader Strike, or Hammer of Wrath, if you're Hammer of Righteous, should I say, if you're AoEing, and your Avenger Shield when it procs from Grand Crusader. It's really as simple as that. Those are your go-to. You just anything with holy power generation, you're going to be firing first. I'm going to hit the tank one and get killed, no doubt. So you prioritize those. Whenever those are on cooldown, that's when you throw in things like Holy Wrath and Consecration. But other than that, you're just popping anything on there. There's a slight lean towards Crusader Strike, but that's about it. Other than that, simply just press whatever's on cooldown. Keep Seraphim going, so you can prop Seraphim like that, 5 holy power. And generally what we're doing now, as you can see, I can't really do much of anything, but there's the Grand Crusader, Shield of the Righteous up. I always recommend that you track Shield of the Righteous. It's not a big deal if you override. Let's say you get a lot of divine procs, then you can keep spamming it. You see here, it'll just keep ticking over and it's not a huge deal. The thing is, it's not so much to track how long it's got, it's tracked to when it's run out. Because active mitigation used in the right time is absolutely vital. Pop Seraphim, and you can see we're just pooling up to that and all that kind of stuff. Track your Shield of the Righteous. And it's more to see when it's about to wear off, to make sure that we've got it up for whatever ability we're using it against. What you'll find if Warlords of Draenor is plenty of mobs have this like one ability, like Flurry or something like that. If you think of Grimrail Depot, you'll notice that the giant Ogron have Flurry, which means that's when we want to have a Shield of the Righteous up. Not really for its general melee damage, but for those moments, okay? That's when we want to be using it. Seraphim again, you see that nice 10-second warning on Seraphim is absolutely fantastic. Very easy to set up in things like weak auras, and of course tell me when, which is what I use. So that is generally it. Other than that, there's nothing much to worry about with the Prot Paladin. The rotation is super, super simple. It really is. It's just whatever generates holy power is a priority, and then throwing your consecrations and your holy wraths on the outside of that. Very, very simple. Pool up towards Seraphim, and then carry on. Obviously, a little bit more difficult when you're actually tanking. In terms of actual playstyle, check out the gameplay video, guys. There's going to be loads of stuff about positioning and all that kind of stuff in there. I hope that helps you out, okay? Get into tanking. You're going to enjoy it. It's a really nice experience to tank well. All right, guys, thank you very much. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.